What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I'm back in another video. This time we're going to look at the top 10 players of the 2021 season. And for this list, it's going to be a combination of how great these players are as individuals, as well as how great they were this year. And for this specific video, players who had major injuries will not be featured, that one player being Kawhi Leonard. And I think right now for the NBA, there is so much talent, so narrowing it down to 10 players is very, very tough, and there's 15 to 17 guys you could argue deserve to be in that top 10. But today, we're going to make the tough calls and give you guys the top 10 players currently in the NBA. Without wasting any more time, let's look at number 10. Now, first up, number 10, we have Anthony Davis, one of the most talented forwards in NBA history. And unfortunately, AD this year struggled big time with injuries. But before those injuries, he was playing like typical Anthony Davis, averaging 23 points per game, 9 boards, 3 assists on 54% shooting. And even when it came to the playoffs, when he wasn't injured, in 3 games versus the Suns, he averaged 27 points per game, 9.3 boards, 3.0 assists on 43% shooting. The big problem with AD this year was his health, as he was injured multiple times and he was very inconsistent. Now with that being said, I still think AD is a top 10 player, and I think by this time next year, he could very well be in the top 6 or even top 5. But going off this year alone, I think AD is a borderline top 10 player, and I'd had him narrowly squeaking in my list at the number 10 spot. Now moving on to number 9, we have Damian Lillard, the second best point guard in the NBA. And Dame this year had one of the best years of his career, averaging 28.8 points per game, 7.5 assists, 4.2 boards on 45, 39, and 93 splits. And basically for the past 5 years, Dame has been extremely consistent, and this year was no different, as Portland once again made the playoffs. When it came to the playoffs, Dame Lillard carried his team, averaging 34.3 points per game, 10.2 assists, 4.3 boards on 46, 44, and 94 splits. And versus Denver, he had an epic 55-point performance and 2 big-time clutch threes. And individually from Dame, that playoff series was the best of his career. And of course, the one thing Dame is known for is being a great clutch time player. And in 2021, he averaged 4.8 points per game in the clutch. That was the most in the NBA. And combine that with his big time shot making, and Dame Lillard is firmly at the number 9 spot on my list. Now looking at number 8, we have Joel Embiid, one of the most dominant big men in the NBA. And this year Joel was as dominant as ever, averaging 28.5 points per game, 10.6 boards, 2.8 assists on 51, 37, and 86 splits. And for roughly half the year, Joel Embiid was the runaway MVP candidate. Now unfortunately, he would not win the award, but he still had a great season. And when it came to playoffs, he was once again extremely dominant, averaging 28.1 points per game, 10.5 boards, 3.4 assists on 51, 39, and 84 splits. But unfortunately, his team would fail to make the conference finals for the 4th consecutive year. And it really is unfortunate that Joel is stuck in Philly with a point guard who doesn't really complement him. And I think if Joel had that point guard, he could easily average 30 points per game on a nightly basis. But just going off this year, I think Embiid, he was dominant in the playoffs as well as the regular season, and he had the best year of his career. That's why he comes in at the number 8 spot. Now at number 7, we have the beard James Harden. And Harden this year was traded to Brooklyn after playing 8 games for Houston. And in Brooklyn, he was the true point guard, averaging 10.9 assists and still putting up 24.6 points per game. And this year from Harden stats-wise, maybe it wasn't his best year, but I think overall as a team player, James Harden earned a lot of respect from a lot of NBA fans. And the one big knock on Harden throughout his career is that in the playoffs, he does not show up. Now his playoff stats this year are a little bit deceiving as he was injured, but I will give him credit. He battled through some tough injuries, and versus Milwaukee, he was playing on one leg. So the playoff numbers I don't hold against him, and this year in Brooklyn was a very wacky year. And I think putting Harden in number 7 spot may seem disrespectful, but basing off this year, Harden took a step back offensively, was more of a team player, and I think because of that, he falls further back on my list, and because of the playoff success or lack thereof, he drops a little bit in my rankings compared to the rest of these players. And finally getting to the halfway point at number 6, we have the MVP Nikola Jokic, and in my eyes, one of the most disrespected players in the NBA. And Jokic this year had the best year of his career, averaging 26 points per game, 10.8 boards, 8.3 assists on 56, 38, and 87 splits. And for Denver this year, they had a ton of injuries, one of those being young star Jamal Murray. But even with that being the case, Jokic played all 72 games, and he got Denver in the playoffs for the third straight year. Now in the playoffs, Jokic once again was dominant and took his play to another level, this time averaging 29.8 points per game, 11.6 boards, 5.0 assists on 50, 38, and 84 splits. In the first round, he beat Dame's Blazers, but in the second round was beat 4-0 by Devin Booker and Chris Paul. But looking at Jokic this year from an offensive perspective, as an all-around dominant big man, he did everything you could ask for in a center. He was passing great, he was shooting phenomenally, and he was super dominant and super imposing on the block, and he could pull you out to 20 to 30 feet, and even run the pick and roll as the ball handler. So Jokic as an offensive center is unlike anything we've ever seen. And I think because of that, I put him at the number 6 spot of the top 10 players in the NBA. Now getting the top 5, at number 5, we have young phenom Luka Doncic. And Luka this year was absolutely phenomenal. At only 22 years old, he averaged 27.7 points per game, 8.6 assists, 8.0 boards on 48, 35, and 73 splits. And Dallas, after a slow start, actually made the playoffs. And Luka this year offensively was the only solid player for Dallas, and he carried them on that end. And for the second straight year, they played the LA Clippers in the first round. And Luka once again was dominant as ever, averaging 35.7 points per game, 10.3 assists, 7.9 boards on 49, 41, and 53 splits. And he was an offensive machine, doing everything for Dallas. He had 46 in Game 7, 44 points, and even 42 in 39. I mean, you cannot ask for much more from a 22-year-old playing in the playoffs for only his second year. And I think going forward, Luka could easily be a top 3 player by next year. In due time, he could be the best player in the NBA, given his shot-making ability, his great passing, and his high basketball IQ. But right now at this time, I have Luka as the 5th best player in the NBA. Now next up at number 4, we have the legend himself, Steph Curry. And Steph this year, from an individual perspective, I think had the best year of his career, averaging 32 points per game, a career high, which also led the NBA. And Steph this year carried this Warriors team offensively and was a dominant force every single night. And when he played, they were 37 and 26, which would have been good enough to make the playoffs. But unfortunately, when he didn't play, Golden State flat out sucked. And because of that, they would miss the playoffs for the second straight year. But looking at Steph individually this year, as a scorer, he had an all-time great year. He had 1 60-point game, 2 50-point games, and 8 40-point games. And he was by far the most exciting player in the NBA, and offensively, there is nothing Steph can't do at this point in his career. And I think if you wanted to argue Steph could be higher based off his individual dominance, you could definitely do that. But for my list, I have him at the number 4 spot. Now looking at number 3, we have LeBron James. And LeBron this year was his 18th season at age 36 years old. And for the 17th straight year, he averaged 25 points per game or higher. He also had 7.8 assists, 7.7 boards on 51, 36, and 70 splits. And very similar to 2019, LeBron had a severe injury that kept him out for an extended time. And when he came back, he really was never the same. And I think with him getting older, these small injuries add up, and they keep him out for a longer time than he would have when he was 30 or 32 years old. But still, with that being said, LeBron James is in the top tier caliber of players. And I think having it number 3 is kind of a placeholder for next year, and hopefully next year he improves and is actually better than he was in 2021. And looking at his playoff stats, he wasn't great, averaging 23 points per game, 8.0 assists, 7.2 boards on 47, 38, and 61 splits. Now let's keep this in mind, LeBron James, he is 36 years old, and those minutes are adding up. But still at age 36, there's really no major decline offensively or defensively. And I think next year LA will come back with a vengeance and possibly win the championship for the second time in 3 years. So with that being said, I have LeBron James firmly at the number 3 spot out of the top 10 players in the NBA. Now looking ahead to number 2 spot, we have LeBron's big rival, that being Kevin Durant. And KD this year was finally coming back from his Achilles injury that kept him out all of 2020. And this year, stats-wise, he was as good as ever, averaging 27 points per game, 7.1 boards, 5.6 assists on 54, 45, and 88 splits. Now, unfortunately, he only played 35 games, and he was banged up for the majority of the year. But with that being said, there was no major drop-off from KD in 2021 compared to 2018 or even 2019. And when it came to playoffs, we saw KD unleashed as he averaged 34.3 points per game, 9.3 boards, 4.4 assists on 51, 40, and 87 splits. And versus Milwaukee, he had 2 iconic games, scoring 49 in Game 5 with 17 boards and 10 assists, and in Game 7, he had 48 points, a Game 7 record, with 9 boards on 47% shooting. Now, unfortunately, in that game, they came up short, but KD individually was fantastic and dominated in that series. And it was pretty remarkable to see Kevin Durant so good so early come off that Achilles injury. I mean, 99% of players who have that injury never return to their former self. KD not only returned to his former self, he was actually better than he was pre-injury. And he narrowly got Brooklyn to the Eastern Conference Finals, missing Kyrie Irving and having James Harden on one leg. But I think individually, he was the second best player of 2021, and you could argue the best player in the NBA this season. But the player I put at the number 1 spot is the reigning Finals MVP, that being Giannis Antetokounmpo. And very similar to KD, he had a dominant playoff run, averaging 30.2 points per game, 12.8 boards, 5.1 assists with 1.2 blocks, 1.0 steals on 57% shooting. And unlike KD, Giannis isn't a great clutch time player. He's still very good, but he can't pull from 30 and hit a clutch time dagger 3. But the one thing Giannis does definitively better than KD is play defense on the defensive end. Whether it be off ball, on ball, help defense, Giannis overall is a better defender, and defense is half the game. And if I had to choose one player in the NBA right now to get a defensive stop, I would definitely go with Giannis over every player in the NBA, given his length, his size, and his overall speed. And when we look at how dominant he was in the finals, I think that series is where he stole the crown as the best player in the world. After Game 1, he was still hurt. He averaged 38.2 points per game, 12.4 boards, 5.2 assists, 2.0 blocks, 1.0 steals on 63% shooting. That right there offensively is Shaq-level dominance. But to add on to that, Giannis defensively was also the best player in the series. He had the iconic block on Aiden, he had the alley-oop from Holiday, and he had the chase-down block on Mikal Bridges. I mean, Giannis in this series was all-time great, and I think those 5 games solidified him as the best player in the world for the 2021 season. And going into next year, he will have the crown as the best player in the world. So that right there is my top 10 list. As always, I try to be consistent, I try to be fair to every player. And I made my case as to why those players ranked where they did. And as always, let me hear your guys' input. Who do you think is the best player in the world? Who do you think is the top 5? And who do you think is in the top 10? Let me know your guys' thoughts, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.